just fighting my blinds. It's fine.
Is fighting against the sun
Yeah.
and office lighting. I'm in our office bedroom, the bedroom that we use as an office. So we have like suitcases and stuff here, but we finally got the desk set up here. So we have
Yay!
some vision of spaces for us to work. So that's very nice.
You have 2 or 3 bedrooms?
We have 3 bedrooms. We basically use one as more or less his room, one is my room, and then one is our extra room where we put the desk to be like a separate office space. He's been on calls all day. I've been on calls all day. He's down at our living room table. I can hear him literally from here. And I was like, we need some. I was recording TikToks. I was like, I'm going to need you to not.
To not be distracting. Yes, I totally get that.
So today we are talking about passing your prerequisites to move on to your dieting phase, right? Most of us did those. I mean, I for sure did a lot of college classes, like 5 years of college classes. There are certain classes that you had no business going into unless you had passed the prerequisites. And usually you needed to pass those, test out of them, whatever, in order to get into the more advanced class. And that's something that we talk a lot about with our clients, and how we sort of phase their nutrition. We've talked a lot about that nutritional periodization, i.e. having seasons, and what we require for our clients and what we recommend for you guys before we move into a fat loss phase. Because I know everybody wants to lose body fat. That's a lot of your goals, and that's great. I don't want you to struggle any more than you need to in that phase. I want you to seamlessly transition into a fat loss phase, maybe not even feel really like you're dieting all that much. And in order to get to that point, and I want you to be successful, obviously, but for you to get there, there are definitely some things that we want you to be able to do first and that we would recommend doing first prior to transitioning into a fat loss focus. Again, a lot of people want to jump right into put me in a deficit. What are my macros for a deficit? That's probably one of the more common questions I get is when trying to figure out macros, people just saying like, hey, how do I figure out what my deficit macros are? And it's a good question, but there's so many other things that we should be focusing on first. And again, that's kind of where we build our program. Is the first phase of our program is really about metabolic and lifestyle optimization, building that foundation to set you up for success later. Not jumping the gun, because again, it's not that we don't want you to lose all the weight that you want to lose and get to the place you want to be in, but we want you to get there healthily and successfully. So let's talk about a few of the things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like what you said about you wanting people to have success with this, because sometimes and I've heard this myself of like being in a diet sucks. Well, it doesn't have to. The things that we're going to talk about today can actually set you up to have it suck less, where you might not even feel like you're in a dieting phase or going through that transition. You know, it is a little bit of a transition, but if you jump right into it without having this foundation built, you're probably not going to last as long as it. You're going to be frustrated with your results. And that can also trigger that like yo-yo effect of like, okay, I'll just do this over the weekend and then I'll go back to it on Monday and I'll just cut a little less on Monday. So we want to avoid having that and just creating a lot more sustainability with it. So you can get in, get out, go into reverse dieting and feel a lot better about just life in general when it comes to food and nutrition.
Yeah, get in, get out, get the t-shirt, guys. No, that's something, and you know, fat loss phases, dieting phases, being in deficit, whatever. We're not saying it's going to be easy. We're not saying you're not going to make any sacrifices, because you do when you're in a phase, but rather than, you know, thinking about your entire life as one long frustrating dieting phase, there's a better way to do it. But I like the feedback that we get from our clients when I have a client who's like in her wedding cut right now, and she's like, I just kept expecting this to be harder, more painful. I expected when you made my first cut for my macros for things to suck more. She was like, just like was waiting for you to just, you know, drop the hammer and put me on 1200 calories and, you know, daily cardio, and me just like really feeling the suck. And like, I'm just not experiencing that. And it's just crazy to like reevaluate that this could be mostly me doing all the things that I was doing for the first 5 months of working with you, and now just eating a little bit less, but nothing feels drastic. And I feel like while that might not sound like the sexiest approach, if you are someone who is finding yourself in that yo-yo cycle over and over again, whether that's every, month or every Monday, or whatever it is, where you're like, shit, I tried really hard to slash my calories, go all in, get after it, fell off the wagon, went overboard on Monday or on the weekend, and then inevitably feel like shit starting over on Monday. Setting yourself up for success takes a little bit more time, takes a little bit more consistency, but I promise you it's so worth it to not have those Mondays where you're like, all right, for real this time, for real this time. And again, like, not saying the dieting phases or deficits don't require sacrifice, and occasionally probably feeling like you would like to eat a little bit more than you're eating, or have a little bit more flexibility at a restaurant than you have. But it doesn't need to be miserable. So here's some things that we require from our clients and would recommend, again, for you guys, if you're like, all right, I want to do this. What kind of things should our clients be able to do in their first phase of working with us before they sort of graduate to being able to be in a deficit?
And something you said too, and then I'll kick us off, when you brought up people asking what should my deficit calories be. I'll start with calories there, but you had also all of these things, you guys. If you're like, oh yeah, that's me, oh yeah, that's me, then maybe it's an indicator that you're not meant to be in a dieting phase right now. So these are some things that are going to help you. So first thing is, if you're immediately going from not tracking calories at all, starting to work with a coach, or wanting to do this on your own and going, okay, immediately gonna put myself in a calorie deficit. How do you know what your deficit's going to be if you don't even know where your maintenance is right now? So a deficit is normally going to be between like 300 and 500 calories lower than what your maintenance is, right? And that could come from activity and food. But if you don't actually know what your maintenance is, that's going to be a really hard number to determine, why a lot of people just immediately jump the gun and go to 1,200 calories because they just assume, well, I know that that's going to put me in a deficit, but it doesn't have to be that extreme. So are you eating around 18 to 1900 calories? Have you been for a long enough period of time, and have you been sustaining your weight at around that? And again, that's going to be different for everybody, but in general, women, right, like average size, we're just kind of talking in that regard. And how long have you been eating at that amount is going to also help you determine, like, okay, I know that I've been able to maintain my weight at this calorie intake, so that must be my maintenance, and then cut from there.
So our first one is saying, like, hey, if you're not maintaining your body weight consistently on at least 1,800 calories at a minimum, you're probably not ready to diet. Let's spend more time getting your maintenance calories up, getting your metabolism up, getting your strength up, getting your muscle up, and then go from there. And the reason we're giving you this arbitrary sort of 1,800, obviously, like you said, this doesn't apply to everyone, but if you're not eating at least that and maintaining your weight, where you have nowhere to go. So
Right.
take that into consideration. Just math the math. 1,800 calories minus 300 to 500, you're already starting really freaking low. And that sucks for a variety of reasons. So that kind of leads us to our next one. Well, there's so many places I could go from there, but okay, let's say general rule of thumb, minimum 1,800 calories you're maintaining your weight on. Because again, keep in mind, your first cut's going to be probably at least 300 calories down from that. So unless 1,500 calories to start your deficit sounds like a good time, we should probably work on that. But on top of that, if you are not able to consistently hit and track your macros for a period of time, you don't need to be dieting yet, because dieting requires adherence. Dieting success requires adherence and consistency. If you want to actually lose weight in your fat loss phase, inconsistently tracking 3 or 4 days a week and then kind of just like blowing it off the other 3 days a week is not going to give you the success that you're looking for. And it's going to reinforce to you, like, I have super low, can't maintain my weight because I'm at, I'm already at low calories. You're probably just not consistent with the calories that you have. So we always look for consistency for a period of a couple of months, because one of my friends said this on Instagram the other day, and I was like, damn, I like that. If I can't trust you to hit your targets when you're at maintenance and food is more plentiful, I can't trust you to hit your targets when you're hungry. So know that being able to consistently hit, it's kind of like saying, again, like, I'm going to really just throw myself under the bus here. I had to test out of remedial math in college because that's where they wanted to put me. And I was like, fair, my math is pretty poor. But I needed advanced calculus in order to get my degree. I could not have gone straight into that class and passed when I was still trying to remember like basic algebra concepts. So I needed to start with college algebra in order to build the repetition of those skills to go into advanced calculus. I did fail advanced calculus first and second time. I dropped out, but you need to be able to consistently adhere to something when it's theoretically easier, right? When you're at maintenance and you're not hungry and you're not having to make as many sacrifices and you're not having to be as planned out and, you know, methodical with your macros. When you get to a dieting phase, you got to plan things ahead. You have to, you know, make more decisions, make more sacrifices. You have to kind of cut some, you know, flexibility a little bit in order to be successful. If you already are struggling to hit what should be a maintenance intake for you, you're going to struggle to hit those targets when it's harder and they're lower. So consistently tracking your macros is something that we're going to require from you, and hitting those targets over and over again until it's so easy that when we make that switch, all you have to do is be like, cool, I'm going to cut my snack out or I'm going to cut my dessert in half or whatever. It's like, once you have that consistency, it's much easier to make changes. If you're trying to both figure out how to be consistent and make changes and then be hungry and make sacrifices on top of that, it's going to be really hard. So the third thing here that all ties into this is also accurate macro tracking. I want to know that you know how to track, you know, raw versus cooked things. I want to make sure that you're using weights and grams and ounces and not eyeballing, measuring devices, you know, things like that. I want to make sure that you're accounting for butters and oils and sauces and all of those things when we're tracking your intake. And that's not to be, you know, super uptight about it. That's to say like, hey, if you're not doing that, you could be eating 300 calories a day more than what you're tracking. That's giving us bad data, because as your coaches, we're going to look at that and be like, wow, they really should be able to eat more, but they're only telling me and reporting to me that they're eating 1,500 calories a day. If we find out that the accuracy in tracking wasn't there and it's actually more like 1,800 or 1,900 calories, guess what? Metabolically, you could be in a healthier place to start a diet than we thought. We just don't know that. And we're going to look at your data and say, this is really weird. I'm not getting the intended outcome here that I thought I would be getting from this calorie intake. And again, that leads us down the path of like, is it hormones? Is it gut health? Do we have some underlying health issue here? When in reality, it's just tracking inaccuracy. And we see that a lot. And that's why we go through food logs with our new clients. Like, hey, I'm seeing, we're just saying 1 apple here. Have you actually weighed one of those apples? You don't have to do it every single time. But if your 1 apple is, you know, 150 grams, but your actual 1 apple is a Honeycrisp, that's 300 grams, you know, we're leaving things on the table. Or, hey, like we actually used 10 grams of olive oil in the pan. That's 10 grams of fat. That's almost 100 calories. Not bad, but just saying like, hey, we need to know these things. So all of those things kind of fall together, I feel like, under the same umbrella, which is like, we have to get a handle on being consistent before we can be even a little bit, I don't want to say restricted, but we have to be consistent before we can be in a deficit for sure.
Yeah. And the whole point of tracking is to gather that data. So it's almost like you're wasting time. And again, in the beginning, like, I remember it was a big learning curve for me of like actually weighing things out and not using volume and whatnot. But the more you do that, the more you can actually associate like, okay, now I know what 4 ounces of chicken looks like because I've weighed it out so many times. So when you do go out to eat, even whether you're in a deficit or not, you have a little bit more of that intuitiveness, if you would, but it's really just education in your head. So that's number one. And two is the whole point of tracking is to have data. And that's just going to give you like, do you have to, I'll say this, do you have to track calories to lose weight? No, there are plenty of people who lose weight when they're not tracking. But if you want to get optimal results, keep your muscle mass like the results that you're getting and make it more feasible so you are a little bit more in control, using tracking as a tool and getting really good at that tool before you go into deficit is going to be really, really helpful for you.
Yeah, 100%. We talked about the calories, we talked about the deficit. I think those things are really, really, really important. And again, I feel like it gets skipped over a lot where people are like, cool, what are my deficit macros? I've never tracked macros before, end up setting themselves way too low, which inevitably is unsustainable. It's unpleasant, and we're probably missing out on a lot of nutrients here, which is another thing that we look at. If you are not getting already 3 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, if you are not eating enough fiber every day, we look at what foods you're eating. So if the majority, and we're not saying you can't eat out or get fast food, but if you're already struggling now, again, at maintenance or in a surplus to get fruits and vegetables, to get fiber, that's only going to get harder when we take calories away, because I guarantee when you are in a dieting phase and you are maybe at the end of a dieting phase, like the things that you're cutting out probably aren't your like chocolate that you're fiending for. It's like, okay, I'll just cut out all my fruits and vegetables. And again, I'm in a end of a dieting phase kind of here. So when I'm looking at my fiber intake, like I have to be very methodical about making sure I hit my fiber because my carbs are lower. So if you are one of those people that just historically slashes your carbs as your first go-to option, you're probably missing out on a lot of micronutrients and a lot of fiber. So we want to make sure that, again, if your diet is not mostly whole nutrient dense foods, honestly, that you make probably 78 to 80% of those meals at home, we are going to focus there. Now, obviously we have some exceptions because we have some girls that are like very much on the go all the time. They're making their best choices. But if just as a default, you're not making 70 to 80% of your meals at home, we're going to ask you to do more of that. You can control your calorie intake better. They're probably going to be more nutrient and micronutrient dense meals. You just have more control over that. And if, like I said, if you have a hard time getting enough micros in, vitamins, minerals, when you have enough calories, it's going to be harder when you have not enough calories. So we want to make sure that we're not taking you from a state of being, not only a little bit energy deficient, but also nutrient deficient, because that helps nobody. That's not going to help you.
And then the other thing that we look at, and I love this because it's not just like we've talked about this before with tracking macros versus tracking calories. It's not just a number that we cut. We're looking at all the different things. So making sure you're getting enough fat, seeing where those calorie cuts are going to come from. But we always like have the right to reserve protein, right? Because if you're starting in a maintenance phase, let's just say when you started tracking and you're having trouble hitting your protein, that's going to be a lot harder also when you go into a dieting phase, because protein is like the least exciting macronutrient, right? It's like, and I always tell this to my clients, if you actually think you're hungry versus having a craving, think about just like a slab of protein, any protein. Are you going to eat it? Nope. Okay, then you're probably not hungry. Like it's not the most exciting thing, but it's essential during a deficit because we want to make sure that you're also preserving your muscle and still able to maintain the muscle that you maybe built in your maintenance phase or before you went into this deficit. So if you're struggling to hit your protein now, one of the first goals we have our clients do, whether they're coming to us for muscle gain or fat loss, is making sure that they're eating an adequate amount of protein and that it's coming from good sources of protein, number one. And number two is also that they're doing it consistently over time, not like, oh, one day I hit 100 grams and then the rest of the day you're at like 60 and 70, right? Being able to know what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is going to make it a lot easier when you go into a calorie deficit, knowing like, okay, I know that I just maybe have to alter like my carbohydrates and maybe I'm having half a cup of rice instead of a full cup of rice or half the banana, not the whole banana. But at the end of the day, your protein's probably going to be around the same amount when you're going into a deficit. So you already kind of have that skill set already built for you. And you're going to be less hungry going into your deficit because your protein has been so high and you can keep it that high.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, guys, there's things we could talk about too with like, this isn't a prerequisite, but it's definitely a recommendation. You were talking about preserving muscle mass. I would recommend that you spend some time making sure you have some muscle mass prior to starting a dieting phase, or you're maybe not going to be super happy with the look that you end up with, but it's not a prerequisite. You don't have to have a ton of muscle mass to diet. Is it going to help with your metabolic rate? Is it going to help with looking toned? Yes. Can you lose body fat without having, spent time in a building phase? Yes, you can. But something that I definitely look at before saying, yes, let's pull the trigger on a dieting phase with clients. If you are not already sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, if you are, burning a candle at both ends, you're barely getting enough sleep as it is, and you have a very stressful life, I'm probably going to say we need to put that off until we can manage those things a little bit better, until your sleep is there and your stress management is decent. Because whether we want to believe it or not, calorie restriction, dieting is an additional stressor. If you're sleeping enough, if you're, eating enough nutrients, paying attention to a bunch of different factors, whatever, can you successfully manage a dieting phase and stress and everything else? Yeah, of course. But if you are already someone who struggles to get enough sleep, you are struggling with managing your stress, you are a chicken without your head for majority of your day, probably adding the additional stress physiologically on your body, but also psychologically, of knowing that you need to be more methodical, be a little bit more choosy with how you spend your calories. Like, it's probably just not in your best interest right now if you can't even get enough sleep to recover from what you're currently doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wasn't sure where I was like, where's she going to go with this one? And to that point too, and this might,
either sometimes.
yeah, like some of these are very tactical, black and white, like, okay, yes, I'm getting enough protein because I'm tracking it, or yes, I'm tracking accurately, but also your relationship with food, I think, has a lot to do with it. So I remember when I first started tracking food, it was really because I wanted to get a better understanding of what my diet actually looked like. I'm like, I knew I eat healthy, but I don't know if I'm eating the right amount of all these things. And the biggest thing that tracking helped me with was I was always so food focused. I always thought about the foods that I couldn't be having or shouldn't be having. So if you're somebody who is always thinking about food in like a scarcity mindset way, of like driving past the cookie shop and you're like, oh, I really wish I could have one of those, and like obsessing over it, putting yourself in a deficit is like scarcity already, right? Putting yourself in a deficit might not be the best thing for you to do right now, because you're not understanding how to be a little bit more abundant with your food. So if you're forcing yourself to eat less than you already were without having that data, it can be really taxing mentally for you. Doing some of these prerequisites beforehand and then asking yourself, like, do I actually include foods that I enjoy now while I can? I mean, you still can when you're dieting, but when you have a little bit more food flexibility, like I'll encourage some of my own clients who eat really, really, really healthy all the time. Like, hey, it's great that you want to do that, but what are like 2 to 3 foods that you just absolutely love that we can just start including, because you have the room and flexibility to do that, so that when you do go into the dieting phase, you can still have that stuff and you're not going to feel like, oh man, I really want that cookie and I haven't had it in, 8 months because I told myself that I couldn't have it. It's like just not being as food focused and working on your relationship with food before you go into a diet is going to help you significantly when you're in that dieting phase.
Yeah, I'm glad that you went that direction. I think that's a good place for us to kind of like end this on. Is we've talked a lot about the physiological being ready, and like, again, the consistency and the adherence and all that stuff is obviously extremely important. Psychologically, you may also not be ready to diet. And that's kind of what we're talking about now. Is something that I look at, which if you are someone who has spent most of your life trying to diet and you're kind of in that cycle of restrict, start over, you're probably not in a good place with your relationship with food, because your physiology is literally driving you to want to eat more, because we're kind of in that loop of starving, high stress, high cortisol, and then trying to like overcompensate for that. And that can be really psychologically taxing. So honestly, it may not be as complicated. It may be more complicated, but it may not be as complicated as you think it is, as far as like, well, how do I even repair my relationship with food? It's been screwed up for as long as I can remember. How you start is eating enough on a regular basis. And like you said, incorporating things that are maybe in your mind right now is a little bit of like, oh, I've cheated on my diet, or that's off limits, or whatever. I hear a lot of that is like, oh, I know I probably shouldn't have eaten that. I'm like, well, did you hit your macros? Like, yeah. Did you hit your fiber? Yeah. Did you hit your fruit and vegetables? Yeah. Okay, well, then there's no reason that we shouldn't have incorporated that, and I think that just comes with time. And that comes with, again, sufficiently fueling your body. You have a lot, like food has less control over you when you actually eat enough to like fuel your life, your blood sugar is stable, you have enough protein, you're not starving. Like once you are able to spend more time doing that, I think you'll be really surprised by how much your relationship with food improves when you're giving your body what it needs. But some things that I look at too when I'm like looking at client check-ins and stuff is just like, where is our level of food focus? How are we talking about food? Again, if you're still someone who's saying things like that, like, oh, I feel bad because I ate this. Like, okay, if you felt physically bad because you ate something and your digestion and stuff, like I've definitely felt physically bad after a day of like too much eating and drinking where I'm like, oh God, I don't feel good. I don't feel guilty. I just don't feel good. That's different, right? If you're someone who's saying like, oh, I feel bad that I ate that, or I shouldn't have eaten that, or, things like that. Or if every time you take an untracked meal that you're obviously not tracking, you go overboard. That was something that I had to pay attention to really early on in my fitness journey. Was I was really meticulous with my macro tracking, but anytime I took the bumpers down, gutter balls, you know what I mean? Like I was just going way overboard, and because I was still behaving in a way that was really restrictive mentally with how I was going about my macros. And then just like I said, really overdoing it at all of my untracked meals. So this is why when I have clients who are not in a dieting phase, we're in a maintenance phase, we're in a surplus, whatever, I add intuitive meals and days even. I have a couple of clients who are doing like 4 days tracked, 3 days untracked or whatever. Work intuitive days in and see how you handle those. One, remove the novelty around I'm only good if I track my macros. I'm bad if I don't track my macros, and see how you do. Like if you overeat the first meal that you're not tracking, like, okay, move on. Try it again in a couple days or the next week or whatever, and we'll see. But that's kind of something we look forward to is like, can I mostly eat similarly if I'm not tracking my macros, right? Like, yeah, okay, sure. If it's like a date night or something, like go have something not a normal meal for you, sure. But being able to stop when you are satiated and not go super overboard, and being able to like not feel bad about taking untracked meals and things like that here and there. Like, yes, consistency, but also flexibility. If you're in those places, if you've been consistently tracking, your relationship with food is in a good place, we're not super food focused, we're not feeling guilty or associating any sort of like good or bad with our nutrition choices, just again, nutrients, then you're probably ready to go to a dieting phase. But for some people, this takes we just need to clean things up for like 8 weeks and they're going to place. Sometimes this means we need to spend 6 months if you are starting from ground zero and you have none of these habits in place, because building this foundation, building these habits, like changing your diet, changing the way you approach your meals, like this is all work and it takes time. But that sets us up to where now we can be like, okay, maybe it takes us 6 months, but the foundation is laid. Like we don't have a bunch of cracks in the foundation. The house isn't going to blow over with the first, sign of any sort of storm. We're really solid. Then all we do is, like you said, 300 to 500 calorie deficit. That's pretty easy to create, especially if you're at like 2,200 calories. It's like, all right, let's cut 300 from that. Let's add a couple cardio sessions, but everything else in your life stays the same. You're still consistently hitting your workouts. You're still consistently hitting the gym. You're still consistently prioritizing your recovery and your nutrients, and you're making most of your meals at home. It becomes very easy to go through a successful fat loss phase without feeling restricted, without feeling limited, without feeling like you've changed your entire life. You just kind of seamlessly lose body fat without ever feeling like you're starving. And I would argue that that is so much more worth maybe the 6 months that it takes you to build that than it would for continuing for 6 years or whatever it is, just starting over, and just kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. So these are some of the things that I would make sure you can do first for at least a couple months, let's say as a minimum, and then you can proceed to fat loss.
Yeah. So we'll do a little recap is 1, start tracking your macros if you haven't, and start getting really, really good at tracking macros. There's so many tools and resources. We have a ton in here of like what actually is accurate tracking versus like, yeah, I'm just putting things in a tracker, making sure you're eating enough for a long period of time and maintaining that weight. So it's not like, and again, same thing when we're working with our clients, we're not just throwing a number at them and saying, okay, go eat this. Like we're looking at their biofeedback and how their body is responding to it too, making sure you're getting enough fruits, vegetables, fiber, and that your fiber is coming from fruits and vegetables, because protein bars, yes, they have lots of fiber in them, but probably not the best kind of fiber you want to be having.
Oh my God. Quest bars. I have like PTSD from Quest bars.
Literally same. Bad experience driving home in a car with those. What else did we say? Making sure you're getting enough protein now, and again, hitting that protein consistently before you go and slash your calories, and just seeing where you're at with your relationship with food. And if you're like, oh yeah, you nailed it, that's me, I'm really, really food focused, starting to track macros and just seeing where you're at and seeing what your maintenance is at, or at least trying to increase your food, is probably going to be the best option for you if you already feel a little like nervous about food, or again, your relationship with food is not the best in the sense that you're in a little bit more of like that scarcity mindset with it. So doing all of these things for a longer period of time, almost to the point where like, I remember feeling like I didn't even want to get, I was ready to diet because I was so like overeating as much as I was eating, which I never ever thought that I would say. So do those things first, then start working on those protocols for yourself, but be really honest with yourself and ask yourself, like, am I actually doing all those things? Am I setting myself up for success before I do this? No. Okay. This is the direction I go. Yes. Okay. This is the direction that I go then.
Yeah, we need to make a little flow chart. Like if this, almost all of the answers for most of you guys are probably going to point to maintenance phase or reverse diet, not
Right.
dieting yet. I know that's not what you want to hear. And, you know, it's a conversation to have very honestly. If you guys have applied for coaching, if we've had a consult call, if I've talked to you in here, is like, I want to know where you're at first. And I want to know what kind of work we have to do. Like, you know, let's assess the damage. Let's put together a plan. Let's, you know, agree on it together. But most of the time, I'm not going to say like, yeah, hell yeah, let's just drop you right into a dieting phase. We'll start tomorrow. Nothing to work on the back end. I promise you, we're doing this for your future success, not because we don't want you to diet. We want you to diet successfully and never have to start over again. That's the goal. So address these things first. Ask us if you have questions. But I hope that was helpful, you guys.
Thanks, Shelby.
All right, bye.
Bye.